All right, I want to say good afternoon to everyone and welcome to our work session of the Wake County Public School System Board of Education. Thanks everybody for joining us and being with us on this fine afternoon. We are just finishing up our 2 hours of work on our strategic plan during a board retreat, so we apologize for being a little bit tardy, but nevertheless glad to be here. We have, again, all board members here and present. In the boardroom, Ms. Kushner. Ms. Kushner, are you joining us virtually? Are you with us?
Yes, I am here, if y'all can hear me.
We can hear you. We can hear you. So we all are here with Superintendent Moore in the boardroom, and Ms. Kushner is with us virtually, so we have a full complement today. And as I said earlier, we are here at the board table, nice and cozy again. So again, glad to have everybody here and see everybody again as well, along with the superintendent's leadership team, all back with us for the first time. So welcome to you all as well. We'll jump right into our agenda since we're running a little bit behind, but I think we ought to be able to make up some time. The first item is Board Policy 4400 on attendance. And so Paul Coe. While he's coming, Superintendent Moore, anything you want to add as far as we get started? All right. Then we'll keep going.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. Great to see you all here together. Today we bring you a revised version of Policy 4400 attendance with the most recent updates provided to us by the School Board Association, in addition to what we updated you at the May 19th Policy Committee meeting. These updates are in red for you in your board materials, and anything in blue are words we've added. And so in the preamble, in the opening of the policy, new language has been added to reflect an expectation that schools work with students and families to overcome barriers to attendance. And the preamble will read with the line, school administrators shall communicate attendance expectations to parents and guardians and work with students and their families to overcome barriers to attendance. And if we move to Section B, in Section B under attendance records, some of our language has been struck regarding the location of the detailed rules, so that language has been struck. And when we move to Section C, we've noted that late arrivals and early departures is new and addresses expectations around those two areas. And you'll see we've added language in blue regarding a print or digital written excuse. So it should now have the sections that read, students are expected to be at school on time and to remain at school until dismissed. During the school day, students are expected to be present at the scheduled starting time for each class and to remain until the class ends. And when a student must be late to school or leave school early, a written excuse, print or digital, signed by a parent or guardian should be presented upon the student's arrival. And so I'll pause there first to see if there's any questions on preamble and sections B and C. Yes,
Gotcha, I'm happy.
Thank you, Mr. Coe. I was curious for our attendance policy, when a student leaves early, is that then marked as an absence? Because I don't know that we currently require a written excuse when a parent picks a child up early.
I think that's something we'll have to look at with the RMP, but I think if there is a valid reason under one of the excused absence reasons, it would be marked as an excused absence if there's a good reason. But, I mean, not a good reason, but a reason under one of the excused absences. So that's something where we would have to follow up with our schools on a new practice.
All right.
All right. Now I'll move us to Section D. In Section D, excused absences, updated language has been provided to reflect a licensed healthcare practitioner rather than only a physician, providing a statement regarding appointments or illness. And in numbered item 2, a local health officer has been added as someone who can order isolation or quarantine. And numbered item 5 has been reworded to read attendance at the proceedings of a court or administrative tribunal if the student is party to the action or under subpoena as a witness. And finally, the last section of the paragraph you see struck has been moved to Section F. And if we look at Section E, school-related activities provide proactive, positive language about school-related activities. It also adds that in-school suspension move to its own paragraph rather than a number item. And we finally, the struck section at the end is moved to section F. So the new sections will read, while recognizing the importance of classroom learning, the board also acknowledges that out-of-classroom school-related activities can provide students with valuable experiences not available in the classroom setting. And then the second addition is, in addition, students participating in disciplinary techniques categorized as in-school suspension will not be counted as absent. And then now I'll move us to section F under makeup work. It is primarily our language that is moved to reorganize in the new section. And in that paragraph, we've added the language that reads, assignments missed due to participation in school-related activities also are eligible for makeup by the student. And I'll pause there for any questions.
I'll offer one sort of question or insight, and I think it's effectively covered. But there were a couple of instances, particularly during the pandemic, where parents submitted a letter and they felt like the doctor's order should have, for lack of a better word, superseded that of the board. And why here it clearly states that the required statement after the absence supports their absence, but the doctor's order doesn't, again, order or override the board. So the board still has sort of final say in a decision or what have you. So I guess I'm wondering, asking, is there any language or does a sentence need to be added that underscores that point or makes that point clear, or is that even necessary?
And you're talking about section D around what the licensed healthcare practitioner provides, correct, Chair Sutton?
Yes.
I mean, I think one of the things that schools definitely do, if there's a question around an issue, they would reach out to both our health services team or the school nurse that's present, and also maybe even reach out to the doctor's office to see if there's any follow-up that needs to happen. But I think if there's some language that we can dig into around to rephrase, to add some details about, I guess, who sets the priority, that's something we can look into to add to that section in section D.
To the extent that you're referring to essentially any time that any form of medical note is required under this policy, if it would make sense to have a sort of a singular statement in the policy that makes it clear that the school district, the principal essentially, has the final authority to determine whether the submitted note is adequate, I mean, is sufficient to excuse the absence. If that's the point I think that you're driving at, that there may be, as opposed to if you got a medical note or a statement that said it's in the child's best interest or for sake of well-being to take this week off without anything that reflects any kind of illness or medical need for it, a principal might say, I'm not sure that's adequate. So I don't have a problem if the board's comfortable with that, of us adding just a line that makes it clear that sort of that the school district is the final interpreter on whether submitted medical information is sufficient to justify an excused absence.
And Chair Sutton, that's also why we added the language as licensed healthcare practitioner instead of just physician, so that there was a little bit more broadness in who would be counted as like an excused note, who it comes from. So, because we've seen in, for example, our face covering accommodations that instead of just a physician, it's a licensed healthcare provider who can note why a student may need a face covering accommodation, so that there is alignment and a process in which we review it. So, I mean, we can add something around, I'm trying to think about what the sentence could read where it says absences due to extended illnesses may also require a statement from a licensed healthcare practitioner. And then if there's an extension to that statement, Jonathan, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can absolutely, if the board wishes to have something like that. I would rather not limit it to that one situation. I think there's a number of times in the policy where a parent is expected to provide or guardian a medical note of some sort to justify an excused absence. So I think we could have a catch-all language that would just make it
Yeah, I mean,
clear.
something like that. I just know particularly as it related to the quarantining piece and
Right.
that policy, I remember seeing several emails that said, well, we made a decision about quarantining. The parent had a note or doctor said, well, the doctor said my child should return. That was in conflict with what our position was, and so they felt like the doctor's note should have superseded that when the principal or the board has a final authority, not the licensed medical practitioner. So just kind of making that abundantly clear.
Yeah, we'll make note of
Might
that.
be helpful.
Yeah.
Mr. Sutton, to your point, though, there is a difference between this is excused absence, and I think what you're talking about is a doctor declaring a waiver to some other policy. And I think those are two very different things.
Okay. I mean, that was our
Right.
question.
Here it's you missed school, doctor provides a note, or licensed healthcare professional provides a note as to why. That's very different than saying, you don't need to be vaccinated for polio, that you don't need to be, well, I guess we don't do polio anymore because it's eradicated. You don't need to be vaccinated for measles, right? A doctor can't write that note and get around the school system and the health department saying, no, these measles vaccines are required. You see what I'm saying?
I do, but I guess I'm only speaking to even here in the excused absence. Whether we're talking about the excused absence or some other policy as it relates to this, who has that final say or that final authority is the only part I kind
Right.
of want to just make clear, and that final authority rests with
The board.
the principal or the board over that.
And I think it was just needing some clarity because in section D, number 2, it does say isolation order by the local health officer or the state board of health. So I appreciate everybody clarifying that.
Okay, I'll now move us to section G.
Hold on, Ms. Cash.
Sorry.
I think I got to go back a little bit. Back to, I think, Ms. Mahaffey touched upon now the early departure. So now, if a parent has to pick up a child that's sick at the school or at an adjacent school, especially in the magnet system, they would not be allowed to go pick up their other child at another school right next to it, because that would be an early departure.
Well, I think we would have to look at, is that an excused,
It's not listed as an excuse.
right? So I think we'd have to look at that and see if that's an addition we need to make in section D as well, along with section C, so that's clear to families, Ms. Cash?
Okay, because I think we need to address that, because I think that happens often when a parent has to go pick one up, or they can't go home and come back with a sick child to pick another one up.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's a detail that we can add and look to revise with our
Okay.
attorneys.
Okay.
All right. So I'll now move us to section G. It's retitled Unexcused Absences, and some initial language has been struck from that section. And if I move us to section H, is a new section titled Chronic Absenteeism, and includes a paragraph we believe reflects the board's philosophy of schools assisting families in a positive and proactive way to encourage student attendance in school. And it reads, because class attendance and participation are critical elements of the educational process, any absences, whether excused or unexcused, can have a negative impact on a student's academic achievement. Regular attendance must be prioritized within each school and encouraged throughout the community. School administrators shall monitor and analyze attendance data to develop and implement strategies for reducing chronic absenteeism. Such strategies should involve engaging students and parents and guardians, recognizing good and improved attendance, providing early outreach to families of students missing school, and identifying and addressing barriers to attendance. And then in section I is a new section titled Special Circumstances to reorganize addressing chronic health problems and attendance requirements for extracurricular activities. And so item 1 reads, students with chronic health problems, no penalties will be imposed for absences due to documented chronic health problems. And item 2 is around absences may impact eligibility for participation in extracurricular activities. Principals shall inform students and parents or guardians of the applicable attendance standards for the various types of extracurricular activities, including interscholastic athletics. And I'll pause there for any questions. Yes, Ms. Mahaffey.
So in section I, number 1, the absence is still recorded. Is the student is going to a doctor's office or needing to stay home for a bit due to a documented health issue, is a written note still required for that to be an excused absence? Is it already considered an excused absence because there's a conversation
yeah.
that's related?
Yeah, there would still be a requirement of a medical note. The purpose of this provision is that some districts will say, whether it's excused or unexcused, if you've missed 15 days, it's going to impact your academic performance. Like you can't get an A, you can't get something like, so that they wait, so that's the purpose of that change.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just say that the changes overall that came from the School Boards Association, primarily your work on your drafts that the policy committee already approved were really aligned with that. You all were a bit ahead, so that the focus of theirs was to address either virtual or remote absences, instruction, virtual or remote instruction and absences in that setting, which you had already done in your draft, and then to include a greater focus on positive interventions as opposed to punishment for absences, which you all had already stressed. So those were the two main focus and themes which you all had already done. So the changes are not that substantial at this point. And just as a reminder, the policy committee approved sending it to the board on first reading tonight. And then the idea would be, and Paul, tell me if I'm wrong, would be that to review these changes today, and then with the understanding that the board would approve it on first reading. Is that right?
Yeah. So
if that happens, it would be with the understanding that there would be some additional changes based on the feedback from the board today in work session, and any more changes that you suggest.
And we would bring it back on at the June 15th board meeting for the second reading as well.
I think we were trying to get this passed tonight on the first reading so that it was in place by the start of year-round.
So I think what you're passing tonight is the version you've already discussed in policy committee. And then these changes will come as a revision to the policy at your June 15th board meeting with a waiver of first reading. So you still go ahead and pass the policy that you approved at policy committee that incorporated the major changes from your last discussion. That is tonight. And then June 15th, you'll have a revision to this policy on the agenda with a waiver of first reading that incorporates the changes we've discussed tonight.
What I'm hearing is one statement in here that overall would indicate that the school district makes the final determination with respect to whether a submitted medical statement is sufficient to, for its purpose, whether it's excused absence or what have you. So that's one thing. And then I just think we need to look at whether there is latitude for the district to be able to say if a student is picked up early. I want to make sure that the majority of the board supports this. If a student is picked up early, that would not count as an unexcused absence if it's picking up a sibling of a student when the other sibling is picked up early for a medical reason. So is that, and we just need to make sure we're okay in allowing that, and we can look at it, but I just want to make sure that that's what the board wants.
Well, Mr. Bloomberg, I think what happens is that when we start to pull the thread, you start to get other related questions. So we have the example of you pick up one sick child, and you maybe have a second child at another school who's not sick, but you can't make the trip back to pick up that other child, right? But what about other similar childcare related absences where there's some emergency? It might not necessarily be that you have to pick up a sick child, but you have a relative who's in the hospital and you need to pick up a child who's not sick, but there would be nobody at home to care for the child. Do you see it? It's the issue of like supervision, especially for the youngest children. And if we start pulling that, I do worry about how many possible scenarios we could get. And so I just don't know if there's an easy fix that we'll get for this that could just be administrative, or if it's something that we'd want to come back to it at a future time to make other revisions. I know that we want to get something in place immediately, but is it possible that even more work could be needed to look at that, to look at how medical absences are documented or approved? I thought of the scenario with the current pandemic. What if you have a student with a documented autoimmune disease, but they didn't sign up for virtual academy, or they didn't get into virtual academy? Can the parent hold them out of school and claim excused absences while there are still a pandemic infection and no vaccine available to that child, or the child can't be vaccinated? There's all sorts of, I guess we say we had some very little things, and I just don't know if we'll fix them all on schedule, as opposed to maybe we need to get a baseline in and then maybe come back at a future time and answer some of these questions. I don't know.
That's why I raised the second question again. I just wanted to see where the board was on whether that's something that you're asking staff to put in a draft for the next meeting. I certainly understand the point that Ms. Cash was making. I'm fine with the first change. I think that's reasonable, just to make it clear that it underscores that the school district has the final authority on the impact of the medical note. But on the second, of whether picking up one child and then another, that would count as excused or not, I do think that there's more ramifications on that one, and wanted to know whether the board's comfortable just saying that's something we're asking staff to look at and to bring back at an appropriate time, or whether you're wanting that to be for the next meeting.
When are we going to come back to this policy?
So in terms of the first change, Ms. Cash, we're going to bring the changes we discussed for the June 15th board meeting. But I think to extend what Jonathan was saying, it's essentially when we look at Section D and we look at the items listed from 1 to 10, the scenario that you gave, Ms. Cash, it's us looking into, is there wording that we would extend from one of the currently numbered reasons, or would it be a new number that we may want to add? And I think we have to explore that further per Jonathan's comments and bring back a recommendation that you all could approve. And it may take longer if we need to pull the thread, as Mr. Haggerty was saying.
Do you think it'll be before the next school year?
That's what we're hoping for.
I mean, because that would be a question I'd have to respond to some people about.
Yes.
I just want to know. I want to know personally about it, but thank you.
Yep.
I would like just to offer that, to the extent whatever the time is that's needed, to sort of explore how often and what types of scenarios occur that have this sort of hair around it, that certainly if you are apprised of a situation, that we work through it with the principal and or the area superintendent, because I think notwithstanding the fact that an absence is an absence if you're not there, certainly any of the consequences that might be associated with an absence are completely within a school level's control. So, and we are happy to facilitate that discussion.
Ms. Carter?
I just had one more thing. It's not really a change that was noted on here or anything, but I just think it would be important in Section A, number 3, where it defines when the superintendent can use remote learning days, because I know I've mentioned this before, but it lists whether, again, they're not listed on our calendar for next school year. So does that mean if they are not listed on the school calendar for next school year, they will not be used? Because I think that's important for transparency with families, because it says here, they're still in policy where it can be used, but yet it's not reflected on school calendars.
If we were planning to use any remote learning days for weather-type situations across the district, I do believe we would need to bring that back and put something on the calendar that indicated that we could do that, or do we not, Jonathan?
So that was not my interpretation.
Okay.
My interpretation was is that the other policy that you already have covering this for, as well as this policy, that if it's not on the calendar, but if you had a hurricane or you had multiple days or what have you of inclement weather, that this would allow you that authority to shift, district-wide or what have you for it. And so that, and this is the same authority that allows the superintendent for, if there is, COVID transmission at a particular school, to be able to close temporarily direct schools in full or in part. So that's that same authority here for emergency circumstances. So that's my understanding of the current law. As you recall, like when this came up in policy, there's current pending legislation that if it has the specific language that addresses when is an emergency or not, and it's in a current bill, it says it can be 5 days and up to a certain number of hours, and defines what the emergency would be, that for when this would be available. And so that's when I think we talked about that if that bill does pass, that we should bring this policy back again to make sure that emergency is defined in exactly the way that the legislature defines it. But my interpretation of where things stand right now is the superintendent would have the authority in an emergency as defined in here to shift either the district for a temporary period or for a particular part of a school or a school to do it.
So that's a different policy, right? I mean, that falls under a different policy, but the other language, as stated, I think it's reflected in here.
It's in here and in the other policy. The other policy is 3102, online
Right,
instruction.
that's
And
right.
this is quoted right in here for alignment between the two.
And just to be sure, are there makeup days in our next calendar?
We do have makeup days, traditional makeup days
Okay.
are in the calendar, yes.
Okay, so we would
As
prob-
well as bank time, all of that is back. It's our next year's calendar looks like our calendars have looked like before. One of the things that we have talked about as a district, and we've talked about at this table, is that I believe prior to continuing to use remote learning days for things like weather or emergency type impact, we need some level set and baseline around what can be expected on those days, because if we can't set a baseline on what's expected those days, then how do we know that they can be implemented successfully? So, and I think this is just a bad year to use as a baseline for how remote learning has worked, because part of it was legislative required, part of it was, we had one instance where we used it for weather, we had others that it was sort of mixed with asynchronous days and what those look like. We've had large numbers of kids in remote learning or in virtual academy at different times during the school year. We've had this concurrent teaching that's not a good model for this as well. And so there's just a lot of things with how it's worked this year that's not the way that we would set it up as a construct. And so that is why, that's another reason they're not built into the calendar for next year, because all that work needs to happen before we start using them that way, if we land there.
But would there be a reason you would use a remote day instead of a makeup day? Well, I mean, that I would understand, definitely. Exhausted the makeup days.
Right, so like the
But
one,
as a
like the
private-
one, yeah, like the one most recently would have caused us to have to change the end of the school year because there was only one workday left.
But otherwise, we would go makeup day before remote.
But and so right now, we have makeup days and bank time built into next year's calendar. And what I am telling you is before we use remote learning for weather-type makeup, we have a whole conversation that needs to occur in level setting. So it's not going to happen until that conversation happens.
One of the things I didn't think about in the email is a lot of people noted that those makeup days could have spring break, which would be different when we're not in COVID. So just something that I had not remotely considered that, yeah. That we never had to do it. There was no time.
Yes, and one of the things I wanted to just throw out there, I know this is not related to this policy, so I apologize for we're still going off. But when that conversation does happen, the remote learning, should we do that, I think we do need to have make sure we call our partners to be part of that discussion, call them to the table as well. I know some of our municipalities offer like emergency childcare services for people who work when we do have weather days, especially in Wake County if it's snowing in Garner and it's dry in Wake Forest. But they do offer those childcare settings for emergency purposes when they can plan. And if we were to have a remote day, they would need to be set up to help facilitate, for those students to have remote instruction. So I know that's adding another piece, and again, not necessarily related to this policy, but I think it's something we just have to consider that would impact some of our students in that way.
And Ms. Carter, to go back to your question, that's why we were trying to clearly delineate items 1, 2, and 3 as separate things. Of on-site instruction day is one format, virtual academy instruction days is another format. Those are the more regular formats of learning. And the number 3, remote instruction days, are for those really, really, emergency situations that dictate a time where we may need those. These are the reasons why, related to policy 3102.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's still ambiguous to me when and if they'll be used, and I just think for the community that's a concern.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a point of clarity, the plan, and as I spoke with Jonathan about this earlier, was to bring you this policy today, to discuss the SBA revisions during work session. During first reading tonight, you will approve the version that you approved on the May 19th Policy Committee. On June 15, we will bring back the policy on the action agenda with the revisions that you approved just now. So we will bring it to second reading, action agenda, so that all revisions are considered on the action agenda, and it will be passed then for the final time.
So Dr. Crane,
Sir.
just for clarification then, if there was something that maybe came up but wasn't specifically addressed, will there be an opportunity for members to give feedback either to Mr. Blumberg or to you or to others before that June 15th meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, next topic on the agenda is the Supplier Diversity Study. So Dr. Gardner, you're here in Pam Gales.
Chair Sutton, members of the board, and Superintendent Moore, thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation. We're excited to do so. And I am joined by Pam Gales, Hub Program Manager in the Office of Equity Affairs. During pre-COVID, our district was interested in having a study conducted about our supplier diversity program with our focus areas of our different departments as well as our work with outside vendors. We embarked upon a study with Paradigm Consultants Group with Mr. Moore as the leader of that particular study. As you would know, it has so many things. When we were getting ready to make the presentation of the findings, we had COVID and we switched to a completely virtual environment, and we were delayed in presenting this study to you. Today, we have that opportunity to do so, and Pam Gales will be walking you through the study. There will be a slide deck that will accompany her talking points, but you will also find in your backup materials the complete report that has been provided to us from Paradigm Consultants. We anticipate that this will be one of several presentations with you to unpack the recommendations and the opportunities for continuously enhancing this program. But today, Pam will highlight for you an overview of the study, the departments that were assessed, as well as identify for you the strengths that were reflected in the findings and the opportunities for us to continuously enhance the program. So Pam, welcome. We're glad to have you with us, and I know they will enjoy hearing your comments.
And as Ms. Gales is coming, just to add a little bit of context that might predate some of the board members, one of the things that also served as somewhat of an impetus, if you will, to this study was the fact that we do have in our facilities and construction department a supplier diversity goal, and I think that goal is around 8% or 8.5%.
10%.
It's about 10%. But what we also noticed was that while that goal existed in facilities and construction, it did not exist in our sort of general procurement practices, where because we don't have a goal, we have been historically less than 1% in our sort of general procurement. And so that sort of raised a red flag, and one of the solutions that leadership at that time, Superintendent Moore, thought the best way to begin to address that was to take a look at and do a supply diversity study to help then guide us perhaps in the development of a broader policy that would extend beyond just facilities and construction. So just want to sort of add that bit of context as well. So,
Okay.
Gail.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. I am here today, as Dr. Gardner mentioned, to just give you an overview of the supplier diversity assessment. First slide. Next slide. The supplier diversity presentation today is going to, we've talked with each one of the participants that were interviewed by Mr. Anthony Moore. So that's what you're seeing here on the slide. Mr. Moore used the comparison information from school districts similar in size to Wake County Public Schools, like Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools and Philadelphia School District. Next slide. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was going to be that far away. I just can't see it. The purpose of the Wake County Public Schools Supplier Diversity Assessment was to define the current state of the engagement of diverse businesses in the overall acquisition of goods, services, products, and programs that support the Wake County Public School System. Next slide. This slide talks about the maturity of the program. This diagram shows the different stages of supplier diversity program. We're currently or close to stage 3 here in the slide, which is a traditional program. So over time, the supplier diversity program can mature from a traditional program to a world-class program with the implementation of some of these recommendations. Next slide. Several departments were included in the assessment, but the 2 departments with the largest amount of spend and opportunities for contracting with minority and women-owned businesses are purchasing and facilities design and construction. That's why they're included here. These were the main 2 departments that Mr. Moore and I looked at during the assessment. Now I'll transition to the purchasing department overview. Next slide. Products and services require a bid for purchases over $5,000. Wanted to point that out. And they use State of North Carolina Division of Purchasing Contracts IPS system, which is an interactive purchasing system. Department purchases between $2,500 and $5,000 are usually competitively bid out. And the Wake County procurement card is utilized by the departments to purchase anything below $2,499. This was the normal process for purchasing. Several hours of assessment were spent with Senior Director Deborah Wallace learning about the purchasing processes. Items such as the dollar threshold, the procurement process, the procurement card process, and how the team processed contracts and purchase orders were discussed with them during those hours. Next slide. Some of the key general observations that were made were that they manage all purchase of goods and services for Wake County Public Schools. The core purchasing team is comprised of purchasing managers and buyers, but that team has the senior director of purchasing, 1 purchasing manager. She has a vacant slot for another purchasing manager, and the 4 buyers, buyer 1 and then 3 buyer 2. Wake County Purchasing issues 10,000 purchase orders per year for products, services over 2,500 that are department generated and in the range from 5,000 to 90,000 as open bids posted on the Wake County Public Schools website. But we also noticed that based on the volume of the purchase orders and current staffing level of purchasing professionals, the costs and processes are a significant factor. The cost per purchase order issued and the staff time to produce POs can potentially inhibit production and the overall operation of the department. Next slide. Some challenges and opportunities that arose during our assessment were that contractors and suppliers were not required to provide minority and women business enterprise documentation when contracting services with Wake County personnel or end users. The diversity codes are not identified within the accounts payable module to capture the data, and opportunities also exist to manage, track, and increase subcontractor spend through current contracts and future hub subcontractor management. Now, even though there were several challenges in the report, Deborah Wallace has made several changes in the past year since the assessment was done. She has implemented some sources and procedures within the purchasing department to increase supplier diversity spend. And some of those things are buyers are required to solicit hub participation for all quote and bid requirements. The North Carolina Department of Administration hub site is used to post bids for additional exposure in addition to the Wake County Public School website and the interactive purchasing site. Prior to the pandemic, purchasing was hosting monthly Purchasing 101 workshops to increase awareness and stress hub participation during those workshops. Procurement staff attend all MWB Expo coordinated by myself to increase awareness of purchasing process and commodities. So she has made some significant strides. Next slide. Purchasing recommendations. The recommendations from the assessment was to develop Wake County Public School diverse vendor portal for registration and access to information on opportunities, bids, and service contracts, like bids and service contracts. Supplier diversity database that supports internal department management, including purchasing staff and end users that purchase goods and services. And staffing support to manage the broad range of activities required to have the required supplier diversity programs as seen in peer districts and institutions. Only a few of the key recommendations are listed here because for purchasing, but the full list of recommendations can be found in the written assessment report that was given to you. Next slide. Now we'll transition to facilities design and construction overview. The FD&C process. FD&C manages capital programs associated with new build and renovations for all Wake County public schools. They track and coordinate all life cycle renovations required across existing facilities, including the HVAC systems, the educational equipment, and furniture. The MWBE procedures are involved in every formal and informal project plan for FY 2018 through 2024. Mr. Moore and I spent several hours discussing the MWBE program and the FD&C building program. The capital programs, life cycle renovations, and maintenance and operation projects all involve MWBE participation, which is very important, and also it is a law for the state of North Carolina to provide that type of participation. Some of the key general observations are that FD&C has one dedicated hub program manager to lead the process and provide program administration, which is me. The MWBE 10% aspirational goal is required by GS 143-128.2 on all construction and repair projects, as Mr. Sutton pointed out. HUB participation on all finished construction and repair projects are reported to the North Carolina Department of Administration HUB office every quarter. Monitoring tracking of historically underutilized business participation is a manual process on all formal and informal construction and repair projects. FDNC has an advanced program for identifying the diverse firms and providing access to projects. The outreach and commitment to supplier diversity on all the projects is evident in the planning for the projects and in diverse supplier and contractor participation that has been on the projects. Having the HUB program manager as part of the team has made that possible. Next slide. Challenges and opportunities for FDNC. One of the challenges is that there's one dedicated person for the program management, program administration, program outreach, and liaison for prime and MWBE contractors. There's no supplier diversity vendor database to support internal departments. FDNC manages all prime MWBE contractors' spend by project. The program manager tracks and manages spend and participation data, but the process is manual and time-consuming. The management and daily process required to sustain the participation levels and wide range of related activities is difficult and complicated, given that many tasks associated with new projects, supplier outreach, and managing the participation of diverse businesses on all projects. The assessment did find that even with those challenges, the FDNC program has been able to provide significant revenue to firms in MWBE communities in Wake County throughout North Carolina. The program has been consistently strong as it relates to the inclusion of diverse suppliers and contractors. And the year-over-year performance has exceeded 25% participation on projects for over 5 consecutive years and has been at or above peer school districts with similar spend and activity. Next slide. So some of the recommendations for FDNC was to develop a diverse vendor portal for registration and access to information on opportunities such as construction and repair bids. Supplier diversity database that supports internal and external stakeholders, including FDNC project managers, construction managers, single prime contractors, and MWBE subcontractors. Staffing support to manage the broad range of activities required to have the required supplier diversity programs as seen in peer school districts and other institutions. Develop supplier diversity training for all key stakeholders, FDNC staff, external construction managers, and subcontractors. Only a few of the key recommendations are listed here also for FDNC, and the full list of recommendations can be found in the written report. But I do want to mention that FDNC did hire a consultant to create a diversity database internally. It cannot be used yet by external stakeholders yet, but they did make that move since the assessment was done to hire someone to do that. And they also hired a consultant to help with the compliance of some of the construction and repair projects that are being done also. Next slide. So the overall supplier diversity program recommendations and opportunities are to implement website for potential suppliers and vendors, develop a vendor database accessible to key staff, communicate the strategic value of supplier diversity to all staff, build partnerships with strategic diverse vendors and suppliers that can grow their business through mentoring and support, communicate supplier diversity goals, process, and expectations to strategic prime contractors that can support MWBE subcontractor spend, implement a supplier diversity focus in the work across central service departments, and implement supplier diversity staff within Office of Equity Affairs, Facilities Design and Construction, and the Purchasing Department. These are the overall supplier diversity program recommendations needed to begin the important next steps needed for Wake County Public School to move in the direction of a more mature supplier diversity program. Next slide. This slide talks about the organizational next steps and timeline that could happen for the program. June and July, we would like an organizational review and prioritization of assessment findings and recommendations. July through August, develop an implementation plan for supplier diversity program enhancement, including staffing, technology, and programming needs. August through September, establish a leadership structure for the Wake County Public Schools Supplier Diversity Program. September through October, engage historically underutilized businesses in the review of supplier diversity implementation plan. And October through November, develop a business case for Wake County Public Schools Supplier Diversity Program enhancement. That ends my presentation. Questions and feedback?
All right, thank you, Ms. Gale, for that presentation. Mrs. Cash.
Yeah, I don't know this. I just have to ask this. So as far as like supplies, the procurement of supplies, are there state regulations, or as far as when bids go out, does sometimes the state pick, or do we always get to pick, which would be nice?
For only in construction and repair, in the procurement of goods and services, there is no
interference.
No.
Okay.
That's
great.
why it's so low. Yeah.
And then my second quick question was, the transportation contracts, that's a whole different field. We've looked at that many times, I guess, and that's an area, too, that we need to be.
That's an area that we're not capturing the data, that we are using, minority and women-owned businesses, but we are not able to capture the data because we don't have that database to do that.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But those services are part of the purchasing, procurement?
Yes, they are part of the procurement process with the contracts.
Mr. Haggerty.
So, Ms. Gill, you actually touched on my question, which was, could you tell us more about the database that's being developed and recommendations for it? Because I think that could be very useful.
Okay, the database that the FD&C has afforded me to be able to get was a very simple database for all of the construction projects to be input into that database, and eventually the outside contractors will be able to input data into that database that will feed into my report. Right now, my report is done in Excel, and we have several projects that are ongoing. So at any one time, there can be 11 to 15 spreadsheets. So this database, yes, this database has combined all of that for me to be able to get that data into one place and print out several different reports for that.
So you do see value in expanding it, maybe centralizing it, and then you'd have the capacity to add in other procurement and other services into that?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Ms. Scott?
Thank you, and thank you so much for that information. I had just a quick question, and I'm trying to transcribe my own notes here. For some of the recommendations that are made for next steps, do you have an idea of how much of this would be sort of in-house, like how much our own technology department could assist with developing the website, developing the vendor database and website and so forth? Or do you anticipate some of these needs would actually have to be sort of farmed out for outside
Yes, it has been recommended that we form a team internally, including information technology. And we have talked with Ms. Gaddis about that, being able to get more information from our current system and being able to include maybe another module that could go with our current system that we use, our current ERP system. So there are options there, but we would have to discuss that at a later date with her.
Perfect. And then I just had one other quick question. And I'm digging back, and in some of the last time we heard a presentation about with HEBs and working with because there's an official process that companies have to go for. Is that right? Or,
yes, it is. They have to be certified through the state of the NC Department of Administration hub office.
Great.
Or either through NC DOT's Office of Civil Rights. So we can, if they're certified through that process, then we can count their participation on our projects, whether it be construction or procurement. We can do it either way.
Perfect. And I think I recall sometimes you might encounter a vendor that would qualify but did not register or had not gone through that process yet. And I wonder if you're still sort of working with, especially trying to use more local companies in terms of working with them to get that certification.
Yes, and I do that. That's part of what I do too.
Great.
So if someone sends someone to me, I will help them through that process. But it can get very tedious for some of the small businesses. So the hub office has worked with me on numerous occasions to get someone through that process. So they are very willing to help with that process.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you, and thank you for this work. I was a little surprised reading through the report that I didn't really find details that you obviously had to look at to come up with the conclusion. You know, very pleased to hear that it was over 25% with FD&C making use of minority and women-owned businesses.
Yes.
But, you know, if we wanted to see a little bit more details of, you know, what the actual levels are, particularly in the supply procurement, where would that be? And I kind of thought it would have been in the report, but I didn't find any tables that sort of gave us a picture of where we're at. I mean, I know it's not great, but we still need to know where we're at.
We were trying to make the report as easy to read as possible. So I do report to Wake County every year the amount of spend we have on our construction projects. I do not report what we do in procurement because we don't have that available as to, except maybe on procurement cards. And I think Deborah Wallace does keep maybe some type of data with that. So, but I do have a report that has the amount of participation that we spend with each one of the of the minority and women businesses for Wake County Public School construction projects. I have that for the past 5 years.
But for this report, there wasn't any more data assembled?
There was data assembled just for construction, but we didn't put all those reports in there.
Yeah, no, I understand not putting all reports in.
But it's available. Yes, it's available.
It just feels to me like you know, seeing the picture of where it's at. You know, in terms of procurement, I'm curious, are there any areas where we, you know, paper towels to textbooks, I mean, are there any areas where we do better or not? And that's where I just thought that potentially there might be a breakdown. But I guess not
I would
yet.
have to talk with Deborah Wallace about that. I don't know how detailed of a report she keeps. I don't think she keeps it like I do, but I think she does keep track of some of the spend that she does with minority and women businesses.
So obviously the database, some of that keeping track will be useful. In light of FD&C, So it's great to see that 25% or more is going to diverse businesses. How many of those are, if we differentiate in between, say, lead and subcontractor? Because we want to make sure that we're not just, quote, meeting our quota by subbing out, but that we're actually looking, sort of across the whole range from the lead to the sub.
I agree. We call them our prime contractors that are, they're both. Some of them are minority and women-owned businesses, and some of them are, a majority of them are non-minority businesses. But the first tier subcontractor on the CMIC risk process is a mixture of both. But then you have that second tier where a lot of the minority and women businesses come in as a subcontractor. And believe it or not, a lot of the minority and women-owned businesses want to, with an entity as large as Wake County Public Schools, they want to come in on a smaller level to be able to grow. And that's what I've seen over the past 5 years, was that these companies come in on a smaller level, but I see them grow to be the prime contractors. And we also have mentor-protege with the prime contractor to come in with a minority or woman-owned business to be a partner or a business associate with them during our projects. So I implemented that when I came in 5-6 years ago, and now it's grown to the point where we do have several companies that have a company that works side by side with them during the whole project.
Well, so that was my leading right to my last question, is what are we doing to build that capacity? And again, it's great to hear what we're doing in facilities design and construction. Are we starting to look at that at all in the procurement side? Because, we can say, well, I bought, textbooks or paper towels from this company because that was all it was available. But at some level, maybe we have to, whether we partner with or I don't know if it's at the state level or where, but I think we have to develop capacity.
Yes.
Not just complain about the capacity is not there.
That's right. And with the procurement side, that is one of the recommendations, to have some of those partnerships on the procurement side. And it can be done, but it just takes the resources in place to be able to do that.
It takes a will first.
Yes, it takes a will first.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you. Perfect lead in. And again, thank you for this. And I certainly hear you on where your time, talents are spent on the contracting side. So, of course, as you can imagine, most of my questions are on the purchasing side, so you can completely punt them. But I think I'll just start where we just left off, which is, so one of the things I noted, which is the will, right? So it's clearly defined as one of the recommendations for contracting in our facilities, but it's not in purchasing. And I think there has to be some real conversation to have, especially because there is a substantial amount of individual people power making decision in purchasing, which looks very different on the side that we're making a recommendation and the place where we can actually measure, right? We have measurable goals from you. We don't necessarily have the infrastructure to have those measurable goals on who and how much we're actually using minority and women-owned businesses on the other side of the house of purchasing and procurement. So is there a reason why that wasn't a recommendation built into here for them?
That is a recommendation, not on the slides, but in the written report. In the written report, it is there.
Okay, perfect.
Definitely.
Perfect. I mean, again, training doesn't get to a will, but there has to, but before the will has to come an acknowledgement, which, yes, we're acknowledging it here, but these are folk who are in the grind doing their job every day at every level, from those who do purchasing carts to, of course, the big decision making, which, of course, lands at this table. But it's all the things in between that, again, without infrastructure, there has to be some clear understanding of, we don't even have a real baseline. So we have to start with making sure people know, hey, we got to build an infrastructure, which then gets to the will. So thanks for letting me know that is included in there. And then I think that the second follow-up for that is, I'm sure it's in this report. What are the human capital recommendations here? Because there is no way this can rest on the shoulders of Ms. Gill and what's her last name in purchasing?
Wallace. Ms. Wallace.
Like, that's unreal. And then, so that's the first thing, is there a recommendation for human capital?
Yes, there is, that we include a supplier diversity director, and then in purchasing, also include a supplier diversity coordinator, and then in FD&C, there would still be that hub program manager. And then also throughout the school district, it would be great at that world-class level if we are able to have department liaisons within the school system to be able to just be able to recognize and get the training to be able to recognize that there are opportunities here for these minority and women-owned businesses.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I think it's important that the public hears that there's no way we can talk about this without acknowledging that we actually have to hire people to get this done.
Yes.
I'd like to be world-class, but we're literally at the beginning of that little sheet. We're really at the beginning. So again, this was really for me to hear what I was assuming, which is there are several people at least to build some infrastructure needed to do the work. And then the last question I have is, clearly we have to build infrastructure. That's clear from your response that you just gave me. And I guess when we go back to partnering, and this was a conversation I know at least came to me while I was chair, and I'm sure Dr. Martin and Mr. Sutton has heard this as well, which is the county and the city saying, how can we work together? Because clearly none of us are at world class.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering what ways or conversations can we have until we can actually hire people? Because for me, and Ms. Moore certainly knows this while she came on at the end of my tenure, to build world class, there has to be an acknowledgement that we have to invest on both sides of the house, and it can't just be construction.
Yes.
And that has to start somewhere, which, I mean, I don't know, maybe y'all are going to tell me we can hire those 4 people you just listed. However, if not, I'm curious if there's been conversations, or even contractors, like we're contracting for somebody to build a database. I guess I'm curious if there's been some interim steps discussed.
Yes, there has been some interim steps discussed, and I don't know if Superintendent Moore wanted to talk about what she had done, but I know internally they are in FD&C trying to work with me to help me through the process with those things that they have implemented. I have talked with Deborah Wallace, and she definitely has made some strides, definitely has made some wonderful strides, and her and I can connect all the time about different things that we can do to be more intentional with the businesses that are doing goods and services. So I think if we continue that and don't let it get lost while we're trying to implement some of the major steps that we need to take to get there, I think that we'll be able to still be inclusive to a lot of the firms that had not been able to do business with Wake County Public Schools before.
Thank you. Last question, because that's good to hear that for both you speaking, on the work that you're doing with the other side of the house. So I'm also curious, do they have a protege set up as well? Because that sounds like a very valuable resource, especially like I'm going to go with buying paper towels, right? Like, because that seems like a innocuous thing that we could easily be doing if somebody sells paper towels. So, but I'm also curious, knowing that the process is lengthy and you support that, and there's also a protege. I'm just curious if that's something that might be a part of an interim conversation as well.
I think that definitely can be a part of the conversation. One area that I see is, of course, is the janitorial contracts, where we have the large firms. We could have some of the smaller firms be able to partner with some of those janitorial contractors.
You read my mind. That's exactly where I was thinking. There are a large number of, I just bought large number of paper towels literally from a minority-owned business, so I actually do know these things are possible.
Yes.
But it is a space that's hard, and I asked a couple of the vendors I use, it's hard to get into a system like this because of the tedious paperwork, so I was wondering if the protege would be helpful.
That would be very helpful, and that's just one area. And even on the, transportation side, there's always opportunities there. So my mind goes all different directions, but I could talk to you all day about the things I would like to see. But
Well, thank you for sharing with me. I had a lot of questions. Thank you.
Those are some of the main ones.
Superintendent Moore, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, so before we started really building infrastructure around it, we need like a response action plan to the report findings that Mr. Moore conducted. So we're bringing you that overview presentation, provided you a copy of the report so that we can begin to build the action steps that needs to come next from this. Pam didn't say it, but we have identified funding for one position already that's already built and funded and sitting there, just haven't implemented. Yeah. I did that a while ago when this was, I did it pre-pandemic, quite frankly, but we haven't done the work to create what it is that we want yet, so it's just been sitting there. And we think that some of the other divisions and departments have some space and flexibility around that as well. So more to come is really what I was going to say.
I mean, and I would say, thank you for saying that, and Sharon said that they do for
Mike.
But definitely,
Mike. Oh, okay. So to close out, and first let me say thank you to the entire team for bringing this report. I know this has been out there for a while. It's been a long time coming. The report was actually done a while ago and working through the pandemic, so thank you all for this work. And then secondly, let me thank you and Mrs. Wallace for the significant steps you all have already taken without direction or what have you from the board, just kind of recognizing what needed to be done and going ahead and implementing some of that. Certainly appreciate that. My question, as we talk about all of this and next steps, I guess two questions. One, how do we get those steps, I don't know how, at what point do we get those steps that you all have taken put into either RMP or policy so that I'm always big on sort of, how we institutionalize things so that as people move on, people transition, what have you, that those practices don't get lost.
Yes.
If and when at some point Ms. Wallace or you leave or what have you, that we then don't regress, but that those things are part of RNP and become part of our normal practice and procedure.
Well, I envision the team that is suggested in the written report start those first steps with getting that done, because we have to sit down and we have to, as a team, come up with, policies with IT, talk to the other, departments to see, what are some of the best practices that we could implement into some of those departments. But right now, I think that core team that's suggested would be a start to get some of that policy work done.
And we are beginning that fiscal migration part of those policies, so that will be a logical place to begin to look at areas where this can be included.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And then the last piece, as we have started, and like a similar related question, so you might want to say that, Dr. Gardner. As we embark on the work around our equity policy, and part of, at least, I guess, what I have advocated for is that the difference in the equity policy and having some work around belief statements and value, but also having some of that work being operationalized in policy that speaks to areas of human capital, procurement, and how we set goals and benchmarks and that sort of thing. Do you all have any sense at this point on, again, sort of the best place for that, and should that be in a separate policy around fiscal administration and procurement? Should that be part of an equity policy? Would some of that perhaps appear in both? Do you have any thoughts about looking at best practices, working with the consultant? Any thoughts about how, where we should
Well, I think this is an initial step to address all those areas that you've mentioned. And I think with this core team that would not only tap facilities and design and construction, as well as our purchasing, but also we need to incorporate people represented from human resources and other areas that we can begin to see a large picture of whether this all falls into one particular policy area or whether we spread out according to different policies. So I think this is a stepping stone to that process and walks hand in hand with your further discussion that I know you as a board want to do with regard to equity policy and whether it's a standalone policy or belief statements or what have you. I think we all look at it in context together.
And there is a MWBE policy rooted in construction. So there is a policy that was approved by the board for the construction side of it, but it does mention procurement in there, but I think it needs to be a broader sense of what you're asking me.
It's policy 7260 in
Yes.
case. I think that should be a part of future discussions. And there's an R&P with that as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, again, thank you all for this work. I'm sure the board agrees with me that this is important work, and as an organization that's now approaching almost a $2 billion budget, it's almost unheard of that an organization of this size and that much spending power does not have some sort of MWBE supplier spend goal. And so I'm pleased, as I'm sure all the board is, that we're working towards that vein. So, and being a world-class and mature organization, as you laid out in the initial slide. So thank you for that. All right.
Thank you.
The last item on our work session agenda this afternoon is the 2022-2023 instructional calendars for both traditional, modified, and year-round. And so I see Ms. Powell, you're already here.
I am here.
Good afternoon.
I am here and ready.
Good to see you.
Good to see everyone. Okay, I'm going to try to share for myself today. Give me 1 second to get back to. Okay, this is what I want to share. Okay.
Well, you're finding that it seems early to be talking about 22, 23, but I guess we're right on time.
We are right on time. We are right on time. So I want to start quickly. I try to start with the easiest calendar first, and that is the year-round calendar. I'm going to skip this slide and go to the slide with some information. And if you'll look at, you should have in your packet a PDF of the year-round calendar. So I want to start by saying that all of these calendars are created, the drafts are created by a committee that includes school-based staff, central staff, interested community members. All of the calendars have 177 student days, 17 teacher work days, 11 holidays, and 10 vacation or annual leave days. That adds up to 215 days, and that's the required number of days for 10-month employees. So all of these calendars meet that requirement. You will notice that on the 22-23 draft, year-round draft, there are 1, 2, 3, I have 5, but there are 4 school-wide teacher work days. And this is an opportunity for year-round staff or year-round schools to have time to do PD with all of the teachers at one time. Prior to this, when we did 180 days, there was never a time for all staff members to come together. So this is an opportunity for all staff members to come together. There is a 5th date. It's October 10th. I thought there was 5. It's just not purple on here. So there are
That's
5.
the district-wide.
That's a district-wide. So you'll see October 10th on all 3 calendars that I present today. That allows the district, if they decide to have a district-wide professional development. So year-round, this calendar is pretty much the same. Typically, it's about 9 weeks on and about 3 weeks out. That's not true for every track, because as you start to kind of domino tracks in and out, you'll see track 1 starts with 9 weeks, track 2 starts with 6 weeks, track 3 starts with 3 weeks, and then when track 3 tracks out, track 4 tracks in. And so we keep going through the entire year. I did want to note that we are now moving to it being called the year-round calendar, and any school that offers any track is a year-round calendar school. I will move quickly to the next calendar. This is the modified calendar. Again, it's what you've seen before. It's about 9 weeks in, 2 weeks out. All of the students in these schools follow the same calendar. So every student is on this calendar. So you'll see it starts the end of July, goes 9 weeks, has about a 2-week fall break, 9 more weeks, a 2-week winter break, 9 more weeks, a 2-week spring break, and they get out right at Memorial Day. Wonderful calendar. We only have 7 schools that operate on this calendar. Due to calendar law, we don't add more schools to this amazing calendar.
And Tamani, just to expand on that, 5 of those schools had the modified calendar prior to 2005 when the calendar law changed, and they were grandfathered and not required to change. The other 2 schools are able to move to a modified calendar because of their restart status.
Correct. So I have listed on here on the slide. There were some original. East Garner and Neuse River were the 2 that were able to go to that calendar because of calendar flexibility. Okay. So before I talk about traditional calendars, I want to revisit the calendar law with you. As you know, there is a calendar law in North Carolina that specifically addresses the first day that school can begin and the day by which school must end. And so the start date can be no earlier than the Monday closest to August 26th and has to end by the Friday closest to June 11th. And so for this calendar, that day is August 29th, 2022, and the last day is June 9th, 2023. So everything that we do instructionally has to happen between those 2 dates. We have to have, the state law, a minimum of 185 days or 1,025 hours. In Wake County, of course, we do the 177 days. I find this hard to talk. Okay. So we do the 177 days with 1,025 hours. So those are the 2 things really that kind of drive this calendar. Typically, we have 11 paid holidays, and you'll see those listed: Labor Day, Veterans Day, 2 days at Thanksgiving. These are the same days that state personnel uses. And for the 10 annual leave and vacation days, we usually break them up between winter break, spring break, and then the Wednesday prior to Thanksgiving. So let's talk about version 1, which has an end of semester after winter break like we're accustomed to. On this calendar, you will see that the first day is August 29th. There's a teacher work day or a holiday or a vacation day or something each month. There's an attempt to have a teacher work day on days other than Monday and Friday so that you don't impact the same classes all of the time when you have teacher work days. There is a shortened winter break, but that was to allow for a full week for spring break. The winter break in total is 8 days, Spring break does occur prior to Easter. To make the calendar work, we have to use Good Friday in order to make that whole week for spring break. And you will see the last day is June 9th. There are some teacher work days scattered about to try to give everybody a break. First semester is 92 days. Second semester is 85 days. That can be adjusted slightly if that's of a concern, but that's the way the calendar committee created this particular draft. So you will notice on this draft and on the next that there are 8 teacher work days prior to the first day for students and 3 teacher work days after the last day for students. Because of the late start of this calendar, it's very difficult to do anything else. Starting the 21-22 school year, next year's calendar, we're able to start on August 23rd, which is 6 days earlier. For this calendar, it's just super, super tight. And so I've heard feedback about why are there so many teacher work days? Teachers have to work 215 days. And I can't put any more teacher work days inside the calendar. I can shift what's in there, but I can't put any more inside the calendar. And so this particular calendar is just really, really tight. And I know that teachers are not happy, schools are not happy, people are going to complain, but with the calendar law the way it is, I don't have the luxury of being able to add any more teacher work days inside that instructional time. So I just want you to be aware of that as you're looking at the calendar.
And as we hear from...
And as you hear from parents, teachers mostly. Parents probably won't notice, but teachers really will.
So, Tamani, if I'm looking at this calendar correctly, the teacher work days, there's 8 at the beginning of the year, but then there aren't any more until January?
There's September 27th.
What am I looking at? That's the other one, after winter break.
Yeah, look at version 1. I'm sorry, I'm on version 1. Did I not say that? I'm sorry, y'all.
Okay.
Okay.
Version 1 was posted after version. So I was in the wrong
okay.
one. They were in the order.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in the wrong one.
You scared me. I was like, wait a minute, I got work days in there for version 1.
So there's 7.
Yes.
Okay. So, and it's interesting to note that this is with 177 days in the calendar. If we went with the traditional 180 that we've used in years past, that would be 3 fewer work days that would be available inside of the calendar school year because you'd have to use them for student days. And that's one of the reasons several years ago that we went to the option of 177, because we were in a calendar year that literally had 4 work days even possible. Once you subtracted the required holidays and the required Monday through Fridays for students. So moving to 177 days has allowed us, in the tight years like this one is going to be, to approximate a work day every month or 2. Otherwise, they'd be far fewer. And it's also why you have so many at the beginning of the year. And if you're going to, I think what the committee said was if you're going to have those work days because of the number of days that teachers are contracted to work, they'd rather have them at the beginning of the year than the end of the year.
That's correct. That's correct. So we'll move quickly to version 2. I did want to take an opportunity to share. Several of you had asked about what it would take to end the semester prior to winter break. And so I contacted some districts. I talked specifically to Johnston County. That was just a person I actually could talk to, who said, yeah, the teachers voted to give up all of their teacher work days first semester, and still, I'm sorry, I went too far. And still, you'll see how uneven the semesters are, even with giving up all of the teacher work days in first semester. First semester is only 80 days, and second semester is 97 days. And I think teachers express concern about especially the block schedule and how that will impact teaching right? So until the calendar law changes and we're able to adjust that beginning day, it really makes it difficult. Perhaps in another year, when it's not so tight, we could take a look at that again. And this is totally up to you, but the feedback that I got from teachers, I presented this at STAC. I think everybody loves the idea of ending prior to winter break, but 70% of teachers, or respondents, I'll say respondents, there were teachers and administrators, 70% preferred version 1 because it gave them some teacher work days, because it was more equitable, because it was more balanced. They preferred version 1. One of the questions I asked was, are you willing to give up the teacher work days in order to end the semester at winter break? And 75% said they were not willing to give up those teacher work days in order to end the semester at winter break. But I did want to show you this just so you could take a look. Okay. Any questions? Any questions?
All right, Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you. So again, I know it's an incredible mathematical task, trying to balance everything with the state calendar law, the available times, holidays, and everything else. I did notice one thing that stood out in the calendar this year, for the proposed year, 2022, is an election year. And I know that sometimes we open our schools to different, as polling sites, and we don't have, November 8th as a teacher work day.
Correct.
As any sort of holiday. Do we know how many schools this will impact, or?
It's usually upwards of 40 and maybe more, but the calendar committee did have that discussion. And 2022 is not a national election, and the calendar committee decided to forego putting a teacher workday on that day because the calendar is so tight, and they felt there was a better use for it. But we did have that conversation.
Okay, and so.
You can certainly make the recommendation that we move one. I'm happy to take that recommendation.
But it would need to be one likely first semester or somewhere to balance it? Or?
It would need to be, I have to get back to version 1. We could certainly do some work with the quarter and maybe move the one on November 4th over to November 2nd. That's the one on November 4th is a quarter end. So, that could take, that is something that we could certainly do. That I'm happy to take a look at.
I don't have a recommendation yet because I haven't considered what that would do, losing that one right before the quarter. But I appreciate the alternatives, and the goal is that we would vote on this tonight.
No.
Okay.
This comes June 15th.
June 15th. Okay.
I could work on a draft and
maybe we can get some feedback and see what people would think about it.
I think if we develop an alternative, we would want to communicate it maybe even earlier than the Friday board materials are due to circulate to board members to have an opportunity to understand the pros and cons. And then staff would need to make a recommendation and explain why we either make a change or didn't make a change.
Okay.
So you would like for me to create a draft that looks like that and send it?
And we just need pros and cons around it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Other board members to that suggestion?
I think
Would you like to see it at least, or you're good? Or?
I'd at least like to see what the draft looks like. I appreciate protecting the time around the quarter. I think that's very important for our teachers. But we do hear from parents a lot, especially at the elementary school level, when when their child's school is a designated polling place, regardless whether it's a presidential election or a midterm election or even a municipal election, just safety concerns around. And I know our schools do a wonderful job trying to separate those two, but I think just there's always a concern that we hear from parents around that time.
Okay.
When we get I don't know if that letter goes to the entire board or just the board chair and superintendent asking for that each year, listing all of the schools. It is 40.
I got the letter as well.
And the not Gary Barlow, whoever the Wake County Board of Elections directors, can't think of his name off the top of my head, but yeah. Anyway, we all get it. Okay. Yeah. I thought it comes to everybody. The Wake County Board of Elections director. How about that?
Thank you. No, this is me talking off the top of my head. I'm considering moving the November 4th to November 2nd. Yes, is that what you said?
No, I said it wrong, but you said it right.
Okay.
Thank you.
But that's a quarter in, so I want to look at how that would impact the quarter. It's only 2 days, but I still want to take a look.
And it's the 8th of November that is election
I'm sorry, the
day.
8th, not the 2nd. My bad. You're right, Ms. Cash. Thank you. You're right. But it would still be just moving the 4th. I'm sorry, you're right.
And we would want to check to see what the requirements remain in the law around workdays and end of quarter. So there was a time when those were required at the end of a quarter, so that's still in there or not.
And I don't know if it's required, but teachers really appreciate that.
Right, and I think, and those are the things that the committee takes into account when they are developing the options. Is
Correct.
I'm sure there is discussion about election day versus end of quarter and trying to weigh the pros and cons, but we'll look at it.
So these, again, were only being brought tonight for review with expected approval or bring it to a vote on June 15th. Do we have to do it by the 15th? Is there a deadline when we do that in our policy?
There's not a
When do we have to
deadline,
have it?
but I'd like to do them. Typically, I bring them to you in February, and they're approved in March, but due to the work on the current year's calendars, we decided to delay this. So I'd like to get them done early. Parents appreciate them being done
So we're already
early.
a little behind.
Just a bit.
I didn't say that.
I'm
We
asking
delayed it.
If we make these changes and we don't get it out before, if we did it the July meeting, but is that pushing it?
It's
No,
just
it's
about
fine.
family notifications and planning and staff calendars also that have to be created. So.
Right. So,
So we'll make those changes and see if there's a way to communicate it with the staff recommendation and get feedback. With the target of June 15th, if we have to push it to July, I guess we can, but if we can get it done the 15th, then we'll do
do
that.
you want to see anything else with version 2 or 3? One time I called it 2, one time I called it 3, but the version that ends the end of semester prior to winter break?
I think we heard pretty loud and clear from the committee folks, yeah. But I appreciate you looking into that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to know if I needed to do some work on that or not do any
We
work
always
on that.
hear, people ask us if it's possible and a lot of the pros, but to show what it would mean was very valuable.
Okay.
We can always remind people that the modified calendar ends right before winter break. And so we've got to get the legislature to allow us to do that. That'd be a great calendar, as you noted.
Okay.
All right.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you.
For that. So that ends our agenda for work session. We're right at time for our public meeting at 5:30, so we'll go ahead and adjourn our work session and try to transition as quickly as we can, and we'll be back shortly for our public meeting. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.